Have you ever finished a book and had the nagging feeling that you missed a lot of what it had to say? Me too. Let's talk about that. Hi there, I'm Library Lynn, and I make knowing great nonfiction books my mission. Don't know what to read next? I always have ideas. Today we're going to talk about How to Read a Book, The Classic Guide to Intelligent Reading by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. We're only going to cover the preface and chapter 1 in this video. My plan is to cover the entire book eventually. I'll be covering a new chapter or two every so often as I can get to it. Eventually, it will be a series of videos that you can watch all at the same time. Mortimer J. Adler was an intellectual superstar in 20th century America. In an earlier video, right there, I talked about how Katharine Graham transferred from Vassar to the University of Chicago for an intellectual challenge. She talks in her memoir, Personal History, about having Mortimer J. Adler as one of her professors. He was a philosophy of law professor who felt that a liberal education could be gained by reading the great books. He and Robert M. Hutchins edited Encyclopedia Britannica's 54-volume set, The Great Books of the Western World, which was released in 1952. He went on to edit other reference books for the encyclopedia, and he also wrote How to Think About God in 1980, 6 Great Ideas in 1981, and 10 Philosophical Mistakes in 1984. He passed away in 2001. The first 2 editions of this book, written by Adler alone, were published in 1940 and 1967. The first edition was an immediate bestseller, which really surprised Adler, and he says that in his preface. This edition came out in 1972, and it's labeled Completely Revised and Updated. His co-writer for this edition, Charles Van Doren, was an instructor at Columbia University, and he came from a family of intellectual giants. His uncle was Carl Van Doren, and I bought this biography and I'm looking forward to reading it. Carl Van Doren was a biography and a celebrated literary critic. I had confused Charles with his uncle Carl until I started reading up on him for this video. The co-writer of this book, the nephew, Charles Van Doren, became famous, or rather infamous, after winning $129,000 on a game show called 21 during the 1956-1957 TV season. That's the equivalent of winning $1 million on a game show today. He was on the cover of Time magazine and became a reporter on the Today Show after his success. Unfortunately, when Congress investigated game shows for rigging, they found that game show's producer had given Van Doren the answers to the questions, and the reason they did that was because they knew he would be better for ratings than the person who was winning it honestly. Van Doren pled guilty to charges and was fired from his job teaching at Columbia. After that, he went to work for the Encyclopedia Britannica, where he worked until he retired in 1982. When a movie called Quiz Show was made about the scandal in 1982, Van Doren refused to be a consultant, and he turned down a lot of money to do so. The movie starred Ralph Fiennes as Van Doren, and you probably know Ralph Fiennes from many, many roles that he's played, including Voldemort in the Harry Potter series. Charles Van Doren died in 2019 at age 93. My feeling on that is that Van Doren clearly made a mistake, and he paid in lost reputation. He never went to jail, although possibly he should have, but Adler was university well respected, and I assume he and Van Doren worked together for projects at the Encyclopedia Britannica, and Adler must have respected Van Doren to ask him to help write this book. And if he was good enough for Adler and good enough for the Encyclopedia Britannica, he's good enough for me. So let's get to the book, shall we? Adler points out in the preface that a great problem with American education in the 20th century was that reading wasn't taught beyond elementary school, usually 6th grade. After that, students continued to study grammar and works of literature, but how to read critically and discriminate between types of reading and to read increasingly more complicated subjects weren't usually part of the public school curriculum. And to be honest, despite over a decade working in the public schools as a librarian, I wasn't a classroom teacher, and I never had a single class on reading instruction. But I can attest that personally, I was not taught how to read well or closely in my own public school education. With the exception of an elective I took my senior year in high school called advanced composition. I had a marvelous teacher named Mr. Bird who taught us how to write and write very well. He also taught us to read critically. Because of Mr. Bird, my undergraduate English professors were impressed with me, except for the one who taught American Romanticism, because I refused to read Moby Dick and it showed. But my point is that I still feel a bit insecure about my reading abilities. Just because you can read a book doesn't mean you understand it. Reading comprehension is a very different thing from being able to just read and understand what the words are saying. If you've ever tried to learn a second language, you may immediately get what I'm saying. I would like to continue learning and honing my abilities, and I hope this book will help. And I hope you'll join along with me. The plan is to read a chapter or two at a time and discuss what they had to say. Where appropriate, I'll pick a book or two that I have read or want to read to illustrate the points. I'll try to teach myself as I go along. Hopefully my efforts will help you too. If not, they're likely to be amusing. And goodness knows, we all need a good laugh sometimes. So, with the introduction to the book out of the way, let's get to the book. Part 1 is called The Dimensions of Reading. Chapter 1 is called The Activity and Art of Reading, and this is how it begins. This is a book for readers and for those who wish to become readers. Particularly, it is for readers of books. Even more particularly, it is for those whose main purpose in reading books is to gain increased understanding. They have a certain style of writing that is pristinely plain. I could follow along in this chapter and pick out the outline, and while I admire that, it doesn't make for riveting reading. When I first bought this book and proudly put a picture of it on Facebook, someone asked if I had also purchased How to Read a Book. I laughed a little, because the fact of the matter is, I didn't find this chapter easy to read. It was kind of like trying to understand cardboard for me. I guess I've gotten used to flashier writing styles where I'm hoping to understand, but the writing itself keeps me entertained, so I float along on the engaging prose. Most of the time, I get some points to ponder, but even if I don't particularly care because I've been entertained. The first chapter of this book made me feel that I'm in for lots of helpings of unseasoned vegetables. It may be good for me, but it may not be enjoyable. But let's get back to what they're saying. We do not have to know everything about something in order to understand it. Too many facts are often as much of an obstacle to understanding as too few. There is a sense in which we moderns are inundated with facts to the detriment of our understanding. That made sense to me. We are inundated with facts, and they are often so overwhelming that we grasp the first workable model that we can get in our heads and go with that. And sometimes this doesn't matter, but sometimes it can be dangerous. And I want to avoid that. There are 4 subheadings in this chapter. Subheading 1 is active reading. They start out by promising to teach me the rules of reading that will help me understand things better. And the first thing I'd better get right away is that to get anything of value out of what I read, I need to be an active reader with an active mindset. They use the analogy of a ball with a pitcher and a catcher. Obviously, the writer is the pitcher, the reader is the catcher, and the book is the ball. That analogy made sense, but I couldn't apply it to myself. So here's how I look at this. We all tend to be lazy at times, especially when we're tired. And brain fog has been my closest companion since I was very small. And I readily admit to being lazy, especially intellectually lazy at times. I have to kick myself in my mental hindquarters to rouse myself. I have a vision of a line that I tend to waver around. Below the line is relaxation, an almost hypnotic state where my good friend brain fog hangs out. I'm often there with him, and I'm not even aware of it. Above that line, things are bracing, crisp and clear, but also a bit stressful. I think Adler and Van Doren are telling me I need to stay above the line to be an active reader. Okay. And I do understand that, so let's move on. Once I get that mindset fixed, they tell me they will give me the skills to help me get better at reading, but the mindset must always be there unless I'm reading for entertainment. And if I'm reading for entertainment, they don't really care what my mindset is. Subsection 2 is the goals of reading. Reading for information and reading for understanding. Listen to this. They say if you read a book and understand everything you have read perfectly, then you've gained information, but you have not increased your understanding. Okay, right there, my mind is blown, but it makes sense. If you already understand everything that you've read and have only learned a few facts, then you really have only increased your understanding to 0. I never thought about it that way. And the few times I've ever had that happen, I didn't enjoy reading. I want to increase my understanding. I just never really thought about it that way before. They go to great pains to explain that that is not what this book is about. It's about how to understand books that you don't understand by a quick read. So now we're getting somewhere. Now I have a map in my head of what they're trying to do, and I see where we're going. They stress that the difference between the two kinds of reading is learning. By stretching your mental faculties to understand something you previously didn't, you are in fact learning. That's pretty much the definition of learning. The writer begins in a position that you aspire to, and you have to work to reach their level of understanding. And they call the writer your better, which is kind of off-putting for the 21st century and for good reason. But I do understand what they're saying, and I'm starting to like this book a little better. Subsection 3, reading as learning. The difference between learning by instruction and learning by discovery. They point out that there's a difference between memorizing something and being able to explain it. Anyone can lay out the facts. The sky is blue. That cloud over there is dark gray. Yes, but can you explain why? If you can't, then you don't understand the phenomenon. And in the same way, if you remember what an author said, but can't explain it in your own words, then you need to work on understanding. To understand what you were reading, you need to do 3 things while reading. Number 1, think about what you're reading. That makes sense to me. Number 2, use your senses. Okay, I'm not sure what they mean by that, but I'm hoping they'll explain it later on. And number 3, use your imagination. That makes sense to me too. I often have moving pictures in my head as I read something, visualizing what's happening. They say learning can be divided into 2 types. Number 1, learning by instruction, and by that they mean you have a teacher present. Or number 2, learning by discovery, where you learn through your own research. Of course, today, many adults taking classes, and sometimes school children taking classes, don't have a teacher present in the room. Subsection 4, present and absent teachers. Okay, they're going to address my last comment. Their point is that reading a book to learn combines both learning by instruction and learning by discovery. The author is trying to get across what they know, like a teacher would be trying to get across a lesson to students. But with teachers, you can ask for clarification if you don't understand. With a book, there's no one there to ask. But even if teachers are available, they can only give you more facts. They can't pour understanding into your head. And I've been a teacher. I understand what that's like. Sometimes it's very frustrating. You think you're being plain. Your students just are not understanding what you're saying. To learn anything from anyone, you have to be engaged yourself. So we need to ask questions and find answers to help us truly understand what we're reading. And this is what they hope to help us with. And now I think maybe some of my teachers in school did try to help me read critically. I just didn't get it. I'm assuming the internet makes this easier for us today. I know I read and I stop and look up words and references that I don't understand, and that's a great help. It will be interesting to see what else they suggest. So that's it for today. Next time we return to this book, we'll examine Chapter 2, which is levels of reading, and Chapter 3, elementary levels of reading, to see what insights we can glean. Leave a comment if you've read this book and have any thoughts on it. Do you think you could up your reading game, or are you happy with it where it's at? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more excellent reads. And for a portable library at your fingertips, check out my book, Library Lens, curated collection of superlative nonfiction. Here you'll find hundreds of award-winning and highly recommended books on every topic arranged by the Dewey Decimal System. I'm looking forward to covering this book with you, and I hope you're excited about it too. Until next time, happy reading.